Shading in pen and ink can often be intimidating if you're just starting out because there seems to be many ways that you can do this. We tend to overcomplicate things by thinking about too many patterns, and maybe some of us are terrified because, you know, it's in pen directly. If you're used to drawing with a pencil, you can erase. But that's part of the beauty of using pen. It teaches you that once you make a mistake, you just deal with it and incorporate it into your drawing. So why would you shade your drawing in pen and ink? So the main things you want to convey when you're shading in pen and ink, you want to convey form. So basically, what shape is this? Let's say you have a circle. Well, is this a sphere? Is it flat? So if you shade with hatching just like this, it looks like a pretty flat circle, right? So if we take another circle, and then suddenly we start following the form with our lines. These aren't the best lines, but you have a better sense that this thing might be three-dimensional. This is especially true if you start adding another hatching, a crosshatch right here. Another thing you want to convey with pen and ink shading is the value, which is how light or dark something is. So if something is really light, you would start with, you know, lines that are a little further apart, and then the closer you get together, the darker your brain perceives that thing to be. So you see, you go from light to dark. And another thing you can convey is also texture. You can give an indication of what material your object is made of, depending on the line shading that you choose. So let's say we have this cylinder right here. So let's say it's a steel pipe. So we might choose to have a sleeker we might think that this is metal right here, versus if we have this cylinder over here and we just do this like that here, that might be a wooden log. So the lines you choose in your pen and ink shading can make a big impact on what we perceive it to be later on. So how can we go about shading? So we have hatching patterns, which are just single vertical lines like this, like I showed up in the value over here. The farther these are apart, the lighter your subject. Then you can make them closer together. And you just play around with that to find your, we call it a value scale, how light to dark something goes. So if your lines are really, really close together, see how this one might look darker than this one over here? You can shade entire drawings with hatching alone. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Another thing you can do is play with your line weights. You don't need to have a whole bunch of pens to start off, but if this is something that you continue to do and that you enjoy, you might want to consider getting a set of drawing pens, of graphic pens. So they come in like tips as fine as 005, like look, you can barely see this. And what that does is it lets you shade in your smaller objects without the line being completely taking over. So here you can see the difference in how thin that line is compared to the Sharpie marker I was just using. It makes a difference when you're shading in, something that's maybe this small versus this small. Maybe you can get away with doing that here, but once it's small, it's easier if you have a smaller point. Anyway, again, not necessary. Another way you can play with line width is like I showed you in this texture panel here with the cylinder and the steel pipe. So you can just draw out a thicker line. And as your lines get thinner, and your lines can keep getting thinner and farther apart. This is where those other markers might come in handy if you want to keep getting thinner and thinner. Okay, so that's hatching. And cross-hatching is just hatching times 2. So you have your original lines here, You have your hatching lines, and then you have your cross-hatching lines because they cross across those hatching lines like that. And they don't even have to be 90 degrees like this. You can have cross-hatching like this. You know, whatever lends itself to the texture you're best trying to convey. And it doesn't even need to stop there. You can go in all directions if you need something to be really dark. So like this. All across. Now that's really dark compared to this. And again, distance between your lines conveys lighter. And you can even start with diagonal lines. You don't need to start with completely vertical lines like that. So you can do variations, get them closer together, get your hatching nice and dark here. You can do the same thing with your crosshatch. If you want this to be dark here, make them close together, and as it gets lighter, bring them apart like that. So you have a value scale here with just two sets of intersecting lines. Another thing you can do is called stippling, which is basically just drawing a lot of dots. It takes a lot of patience because it takes forever. You would just shade in your project by making dots closer to one another, like this. And the farther apart they get, the lighter your value. And if you have a lot of dark sections in your drawing, this is definitely going to take a long time. Look, this has taken me already like 30 seconds, and it's just this tiny value scale right here. So you can also do random lines, scribbling. You know, maybe that doesn't work for every application, but nothing works for every application. This might be nice for, I don't know, shorter curly hair maybe. But again, dark to light. And obviously you can make these scribbles smaller, right? If you're in a small, if you want to make it not as obvious that it's a bunch of scribbles, you can make them tighter. Something like that. Okay, so now I'll show you this on, big surprise, a sphere with a light source. So the point of shading is to determine light and dark, and for that you need to know where your light source is coming from. So let's say you've got a bunch of spheres here. These arrows are going to be our light source. That means we want this to be our lightest section, and you would think that down here would be our darkest section, but actually the darkest section in the object actually begins somewhere around the midpoint where things start to drop off. Let's get a little shadow in here. So we have that hatching here. And if this is a 3D object, you wanna follow the shape. So this is not the prettiest sphere of all time, but you get the idea. Could also do it and sometimes there's a little bit on the side here like that. If you wanted to do scribbling on the sphere, you start out with your darkest scribbles where the light meets the dark. And it keeps being dark at the bottom. But this is most obviously our darkest point here, so. And you see how different that looks from these? These might be a solid object, whereas this just might be a hairball or something fluffy made of wool. You can also do that thing where we play with the line weight. I didn't make that as thick as I wanted it to. Let's say that's our darkest point right here. Then we put another thicker line down here. You know, my lines are getting thinner. It's still pretty dark. You know. And more space between them. So light to dark. And the same thing would happen with your stippling. You can see this takes considerably longer than the other methods. Imagine trying to fill a whole 18 by 20 piece of artwork with stippling. It takes forever. You can even do your shadow down here with stippling if you wanted to. Those are different ways to convey the value of your forms. And this applies to any shape. Like you could have this sort of ribbon here. Like that. And let's say our light source is about the same. I'm not going to deal with the shadows on the bottom right now, but you can easily convey your form with how you put your lines. That. So this is bright because your light source is on the top. If it was darker here, you could add in your cross-hatching, or you could even just add in more hatching lines that go the same way. I feel this kind of breaks the flow. This suggests it's more of a smooth material, but it's your drawing, so it's up to you. You can do it however you want. So that's all you really need to get started shading or suggesting form, value, and texture in pen and ink. So you can start with those simple forms and play around with it. Now it's very low risk, it's just a circle, and you'll be well on your way. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for listening. Start now. You can do it.